Hello. Uh, Before we begin, quick show of hands. How many of you know what Akash is or have heard of Akash? All right, my work will be simpler. Today, I want to talk about not much about Akash. Really, I want to talk about why we hear what we're, why we hear, what are we doing? Because I feel like this era or this generation of protocols have got lost into too much the weeds and really forgot what we're doing. And more often than not, you see quite a lot of closed source, gated systems with no intention of open sourcing and no intention of really, addressing the core problem that we are here to solve. And that era is lost. We don't write white papers anymore. So hopefully by end of the session, we'll have answers to the questions we lost. My name is Osuri. I'm the CEO for Overclock Labs. I'm a core contributor to Akash Network. Been an open source engineer for most of my life. Prior to Akash, founded a company called AngelHack. And my coding career, I've been writing quite a lot of libraries that contribute to container native ecosystem. Some of my code that I wrote, used by Kubernetes and Docker and whatnot, has been trending in top 10 in the Golang category, right above Golang. Golang happens to be the language of the infrastructure and language of Ethereum clients, and trending on top 20 across the board. Now, if you think about compute, right? Compute really, or the current compute we see, which is foundationally on the internet, really began in 1969. I'm not talking about the old and compute from Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace area, but really the modern day compute was created in 69 with the decentralized internet. And for some reason, along the way, it became heavily controlled and heavily centralized. Before 69, we had computers. It was primarily mainframes, massive computers that people used to go to get access. You need to go borrow time and physically go to the computer in order to use. In the 80s, that shifted towards the era of personal computers. More power in the hands of the people. Now you don't need to go to a centralized, massive machine, but rather from the comfort of your own home, you will be able to access compute with the same amount of power that these large mainframe systems had. And that distribution of compute led to the internet. Internet built a decentralized network built on open protocols. That led to the historic innovation that we have here. So historically, from centralization to distribution to decentralization is how the internet was born, and the innovation that we have is because of decentralization. And from this heavy distribution, they grew a need for heavy coordination. They grew a need for centralized data keeping or processing power because these devices transition from computers to mobile phones, which are far less powerful, which led to this massive industry called the cloud. As you can see, most spend today is done by hyperscalers, namely 3 companies, right? Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. Close to 70% of all the IT spend is done by 3 companies. What that really drives is loss of sovereignty for the common, right? Because when somebody pays for most of the IT equipment, the equipment vendors are going to optimize or design their equipment to be ideal for the large hyperscalers and not necessarily the common good. As you can see here, slowly how we're losing control of perhaps one of the most important layers that keeps our modern society together, the cloud. And that resulted in massive gatekeeping of resources. And we saw what happened with AI last year, even now to a certain degree. It was impossible to get decent high-density compute or high-density GPUs that is foundation for machine learning, right? If you want to get H100s and A100s, you literally have to finance the company in millions of dollars, stand in line, and the cloud providers will choose who gets the compute. That's how OpenAI was able to get massive amounts of compute from the likes of Amazons and Microsoft of the world, because there was complete closed off mechanism to get the compute. And there's a story in Semaphore that talked about how students couldn't get access to H100s or A100s back then to do basic machine learning, and how they could actually go to a decentralized network and was able to actually get the compute they need. But the problem is now better, a little better, but that shows us what decentralization can really lead to, right? And the costs, overwhelming costs. Andreessen Horowitz wrote a report, talked about where the money really goes when we pay online services. And it turns out over 50%, or 50 cents in every dollar you pay to an online service actually goes to one of the cloud providers that the public did not elect. It's just this oligopoly of three providers really that charge a cloud tax. All of us pay a cloud tax without even knowing we're paying a cloud tax. And that's the tax on the society, considering cloud is the most important layer that processes all our data and stores all our data, right? In some cases like Asana, where 63% of every dollar you pay actually goes to one of the cloud providers. And we saw what happened. What does this centralization lead to? Well, we remember CrowdStrike. I never heard of CrowdStrike until recently. And show of hands, how many of you were impacted by the CrowdStrike when it went down? 1, 2. Okay, some of you in the room here. When CrowdStrike failed because somebody pushed bad code into production. Not a state actor attack. Somebody pushed bad code, and somehow the bad code made it into every device that depends on the service. And turns out there are a lot of them. And one of the main industries that were impacted was the airline industry, where about thousands of people were stranded without flights, without food, without accommodation, couldn't fly, couldn't even book hotel rooms because all this entire industry was using CrowdStrike service, right? And then we had Delta alone canceling about 7,000 flights on that day because somebody pushed bad code. Just remember, I mean, that is the classic outcome of what a system that's bloated with controls that are not transparent can lead to. And this is not this frustration is not coming just from the industry and the society, but also from the government, right? And you see quite a lot of antitrust lawsuits now, or investigation rather, by the US government to the cloud providers. You can see a lot of lawsuits against cloud providers on stifling innovation, because a lot of times these are parasitical organizations that take open science, open community, and build products on top of them without contributing back anything to the open source community. Amazon is famously known for their entire services stack, which is built on open source software, and which effectively robs open source companies from their business models, right? And this is a situation we have here. It's very obvious decentralization leads to higher costs and less access and reduction of innovation. In the economy, economic inefficiency is rather very obvious. What happens if we go down this path? What are we looking at? We are looking at a very bleak future where we have digital feudalism. There used to be a time in our history that few people had access or control over the most. The few lords that control the peasants. And all of us, back then, people used to go to these lords to get rationed with what they have, and exactly what we're seeing today. Large corporations ration compute for us, the new plebs. If we don't do something about it, we are risking our society to go backwards into the feudalistic, hellscape that we all escaped. And this bleak future is where the few, the wealthy corporations, are the new digital lords, and the governments control advanced cloud computing that leads to monopolized innovation, deepening inequality, and stifling progress for smaller entities. And the sentiment is heard loud and clear, and that's where we ended up with what we have today, the decentralized cloud solution. And this is the reason we are building what we're building. To go back to the foundation that original internet was founded upon, where compute is a public utility. Compute power should be as free as the air we breathe and the water we drink. This is a future where innovators from every corner of the globe have the tools to build, create, and transform without barriers. What that leads to is the restoration of sovereignty, because without sovereignty, there is no society. Without people taking back what originally belongs to the people, there is no escape from the feudalism. And second, the democratization and access to resources. What we saw with compute. Well, there is an enormous amounts of compute available to us. And this compute can be democratized. The access should be transparent, right? Instead of controlled by the few. Cost efficiency, like I said, there is 95% of the global compute in data centers is not used. And that number is significantly higher. There's an opportunity here for decentralized systems to be able to access this compute and in a manner, at a price point that's significantly lower. This is an example of Akash network where same type of compute that you get normally on Amazon costs somewhere north of 85, 83% in some cases. In some cases, like GPUs, it's actually about 50% cheaper than what you would get. So you are able to get the same quality of compute for significantly lower. Why? Because decentralization leads to open, transparent pricing mechanisms that can lead to hyper-efficient pricing controls. And decentralization leads to incredible reliability, right? Why? Akash has been around, and Filecoins has been around. A lot of these networks have been around for so long, but they never went down. Why? Because it's not a single node or a single company that controls these resources, but rather a network of organizations that have a common consensus through code that control the network. And and they're not prone to errors. We see quite a lot of bugs as well. In fact, with Akash, we actually saw an exploit get shipped into the code that passed the barrier somehow. But since it was open source, since people are looking at the source code, a fix was implemented in a matter of hours before it could impact anyone in production. That's the kind of resiliency these open source networks can bring. And this is the new era of innovation, right? Where decentralization is the lifeblood of innovation. And this new era of this sector that's just forming right in front of our eyes, called the deepened sector, right? And every layer of infrastructure is now being decentralized, all the way from storage with Filecoin, RVs of the world. We have compute with Akash and Flux and a whole lot of protocols that are contributing this decentralized compute layer. So the machine learning, Jensen, you saw earlier speak on stage, BitTensor, improving or rather decentralizing machine learning layer to RPC networks, to VPN networks, and a whole lot of incredible layers that are all getting decentralized. And this is very real. And I want to take a brief moment to talk about Akash, which is the world's first decentralized supercloud. And the foundation of Akash network is to federate underutilized supply, underutilized cloud-capable clusters that are distributed across the globe and offer in a permissionless manner. The way it works is very straightforward. It is a protocol where users means the user of the tenant, which means the user of the network, describe their workload and specify the price point they're willing to pay for the workload, place it on chain, an order gets created on the marketplace to which the providers that can fulfill the order bid on the workload, and the tenant then selects the workload to the provider that matches their requirements. A lease gets created, then the workload gets deployed. This is a very simple protocol, and it works amazingly well. It also employs something called a reverse auction mechanism, where the main advantage is the user that uses the compute has complete control over the price, right? And also another property is the providers that offer compute bid to win your cloud, and not the other way where you have to stand in line. So it's a complete reversal on how we use the cloud today. Some of these, Akash has hundreds of applications deployed, but some of the few ecosystem participants I like to highlight here. Venice, they're both in the centralized as well as decentralized arena. The biggest user for Akash today is NVIDIA. Akash and perhaps is the only protocol, I believe, that's integrated directly into NVIDIA products. And some of the other users I'm very proud of is Venice AI. Venice is a privacy-optimized ChatGPT replacement built on Akash network. And the best advantage you get with Venice is whatever you talk to Venice, it stays, it doesn't, it's not logged, it's not read by anyone else, right? Personal story, recently had a health scares, and my doctor gave me diagnosis, and I had lots of questions on this diagnosis, and I did not want to use ChatGPT because ChatGPT remembers everything. I'm not comfortable giving ChatGPT my medical data. I was comfortable enough to give it to Venice because I know for sure Venice being built on Akash network gives me the privacy. I know for sure Venice doesn't record anything, and whatever I give Venice is not going to be used against me. And those are some of the use cases that really inspire me to build Akash, because the kind of privacy, people behave differently when you know you have privacy versus not. Even though people claim that, even though you could be an open book and you have nothing to hide, but research and has proven that when you know you're not being watched, you behave differently. And so I'm able to ask Venice questions I normally wouldn't be able to ask ChatGPT. And that's the kind of impact these decentralized systems are starting to make today. Akash has been growing incredibly well. This quarter alone, we saw a record number of leases. Leases are applications deployed on Akash. About 27,000 applications in the last quarter, and a quarter before. And we also have last quarter we also saw incredible a record of application. That's 44% quarter-on-quarter growth for Akash network. Before I leave, as we stand, I want to leave you with a final thought. As we stand in the crossroads of technological advancement, the choice is really ours, right? To continue down the path of centralization, or to embrace and unlock a new era of innovation and empowerment. With that, I'll take questions. Questions? Well, Akash is a foundational layer. It does not address privacy, but there's few tools given for privacy, right? So first is, ideally we want to go to where the data is versus bringing that data to the compute. Ideally, now, if you can go to the data, is the ultimate form of privacy, because you know for sure the data is not leaving the domain of control of the owner. But if we have to bring that data to the compute, the techniques with homomorphic encryption, which is not real yet, so there are techniques I don't think any of them are equally attractive enough, basically. Yeah. You guys are working on something cool.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think this is.
Aren't you guys working on privacy? Yeah. And in very design for Akash is a protocol at a lower level. The expectation is there's higher level protocols that offer privacy, and Akash by design is extremely simple. Akash is a marketplace for compute. a decentralized marketplace where protocols like Vana can actually deploy on top of Akash or source compute on top of Akash and source bandwidth and rather the primitives for which you can offer privacy and users can get privacy, right? So because web is essentially protocols built on protocols. Great. If no more questions, thank you all.
All right.